Hi, I'm Armin, lead trainer at Notch, and you're about to watch a sample chapter from our free Essentials course. The Notch Essentials course is the perfect starting point if you're new to Notch or the world of motion graphics in general. It's also a great refresher if it's been a while since you used Notch, or if you're looking for tips and tricks to speed up your workflow. The Notch Essentials course is completely free. Follow along with the workshops using your base or pro subscription. If you are new to Notch, you can use the free trial installer. However, I'd recommend getting your hands on the currently discounted Notch Builder learning license. The sample chapter I've prepared for you is just one excerpt from the particles chapter within the course, and it explains how to create a geometry-based particle system. If you'd like to learn more, head over to the Learn section of our homepage to sign up for the free Notch Essentials course and get access to the whole thing. Enjoy! Welcome back to the particle chapter. Since we're done with the basics, I think we can move on to something a little bit more exciting. So I'm going to draw our attention to the third layer, geometry-based particle systems. So this is more or less what we are going to build next. And trust me, it doesn't require that great many nodes to achieve this look. Right, let's get started. I'm going to make a new layer and I'm going to call this geometry particles. So the starting point here will be just the same as in the previous workshop. We will need a particle root. And we're going to need some kind of an emitter. So in this case, we're going to go for the very same primitive emitter. We will need a renderer, but instead of point renderer or geometry connection renderer as we've used previously, we're going to go for trail renderer. There we go. Now, mind you, don't grab the trail emitter, grab the trail renderer. They're quite similar, but they fulfill very different tasks. Cool, we have three main nodes in the scene. Let's start animating. Well, look at that. I started playback, but nothing is happening. Well, there's a good reason why nothing is happening. Trail renderer does not draw trails unless it actually sees some kind of a motion path. So motion path would be given by any and all of the effectors. So for this setup to actually run, we need some kind of an effector. I think the first one we're going to add here will be curl noise fluid effector. There we go. As soon as we add that, we see the trails. Great. Let's make some changes to the curl noise fluid effector. I think we don't need that much of speed here, so maybe 0.17 on speed value. I think it would be nice to have quite a bit of curl, so let's just put some insane number like 300. It is working. It looks horrid though. Let's fix that. I think if we drop now the noise size to something reasonably small, this will start to look quite nicer. There we go. This is much, much better. In fact, I think we can add one more effector to make this a little bit more exciting. How about turbulence? We are all familiar with both of them now. So turbulence effector, I'm going to connect it to the particle root. And let's change some values here as well. I think velocity could be bigger, so maybe 13.5. Radius, however, could be smaller, so maybe 4. Yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that. To be honest, I think we have too great many particles in this scene. Since we're going to be translating this all to geometry, first thing we should do, we should make sure that we are using less particles. In the primitive emitter, we have a max particle count property. I'm going to drop that down to something like 8,000. I'm hitting home to reset the playhead. Yep, that looks a little bit more reasonable, a little bit more down to earth. Okay, so we do have some behavior. We have a renderer and we have an emitter. In fact, in emitter, we could expand the particle life to 8 seconds instead, so that they just decay for a bit longer. They stay on the screen. They stay with us on the screen a little bit longer. Great. So how do we translate all of this to the actual geometry? Well, in a trail renderer, we have a property called primitive type. So default is thick lines. Let's change it to extruded geometry. As soon as we change it to extruded geometry, we actually have a 3D object available here. So all of these lines all of a sudden are in 3D. Great. although there's one problem. I think it's very hard to read what's going on because it's so super flat lit. I think we need to make some changes here. We need to add some lighting. I'm gonna go for skylight. Now, before I connect it to the root, I have to make sure about a couple of things. First of all, it's going to be very expensive on my GPU, so I'm going to reduce the num sample directions to something more appropriate, 50, or actually 20. Now I can connect it to the root. I did connect it to the root, but it's still hashed out red. There's a good reason why it's hashed out red, because in the root node, I definitely have to enable deferred rendering so that a computer would know, so that Notch would know that it has to up its game and do some extra computations. I'm gonna enable the high dynamic range too, and I'm gonna preview how things looks now. Well, I think this is a little bit more exciting. This is way better. Back in the skylight, we might as well tick on omnidirectional, just so the light distributes a little bit more nice. What we should do in trail render, I think we should make these lines thicker. So the line thickness, I'm gonna set it to 2. Actually, I'm gonna be generous, I'm gonna set it to 3. And I will reduce the particle life. I don't think having it living for 8 seconds is a good idea. Let's drop it down to 4 seconds instead. I think this definitely works. So back to trail render, can we get away with 4 on that line thickness? I think we can. Okay, cool. So this is quite nice. Maybe let's expand a little bit on lighting. So we have a skylight. So why don't we add an environment map here and take advantage of that? I'm gonna go to my assets, HDR folder, and I'm going to choose one of the HDRs available. Perhaps glass passage would work for us here. Cool, so now we have a HDRI image. We can use that with the environment map node. So I'm going to connect that to the root. I'm going to connect the video loader, this HDRI image, to the environment map, and I'm going to feed this environment map to the skylight. All of a sudden, these two are working together. Great! Now, I don't really think that I'm having the best performance available. I kind of feel that my machine is underperforming, even though I have quite significantly powerful GPU installed in it. I have 2080 Ti. There's a good reason why it's a little bit underperforming. So by default, I have my frame rate locked up in this file. So if I press on the P icon here, you will see that my minimum and maximum is set to 25. So the default state would be 0 and 999 on max. So let's see the actual performance. 27, 26, 25. This is not great. It's not a big, 12, 24. This is not great. There's not great many particles here, but the performance is rather poor. You remember I mentioned that it's quite important to keep track of number of particles as an allowance and number of particles as an actual use. So if we're only drawing 8,000 particles on the screen, there is no need to ask for Notch to allocate 64,000 from the system. As soon as I flash these numbers up and restart the playhead, I see that my performance jumped significantly up. I'd say almost 2 or 3 times better performance right here. Cool. Although the particles now looks quite different, the trails are quite shorter. There's a reason why the trails are shorter now. Since we have a variable frame count, there's a variable in the length of the trails. That's why we had this setting, the time property, locked to 25 by 25 by default. So check this out. If I'm going to lock this back to 25 by 25, all my trails are significantly longer. That is because now every single trail knows that it has to be counted as 25 FPS item. Cool. I still want this a little bit thicker, to be honest. Maybe 6. Oh yes, now we're talking. Now it's much better. Maybe the primitive emitter, or actually, yeah, maybe primitive emitter could be smaller too. Let's go and make it 0.5 on all 3 axes. I don't think this actually made it better. I'm gonna bring it back to 1 by 1 by 1. So we do have a little bit of lighting here. How do we expand on this setting? Obviously, we have only 1, 2, 3, 5 nodes to make this particle system run, and a couple of nodes to make a lighting system run. I think we can just build on it. I think we can just make it a little bit nicer and more interesting. I think I'm going to reduce the brightness of skylight, and I'm going to add some regular light. So light, let's connect it to the root. I see it come into the center of the graph. I definitely want this to drop a little bit of a shadow. Oof, what a harsh shadow it is. I'm just gonna make sure that it's a bit softer. Let's add some drama. Let's put this downwards. Let's give it a color, maybe a bit warmer color. Let's make a copy of this light, connect it to the root. Let's bring it to the other side. So up and around, and let's rotate that. Let's pivot it downwards. Maybe a bit higher up. This will be a cold light. Okay, now we have a little bit more drama going on in this shot. That's good. What else can we do to make this visually appealing and interesting? I think we can come back to the trail renderer and change some settings here. Perhaps we should go for length, and length should be just 1. Let's see how that looks. I actually like this a little bit better. Especially if I was to come back to the live setting and yet again expand it a little bit. How would that look? We're talking particles. This is literally changing a setting and seeing how it behaves and changing a setting again and again and again and again. That's pretty much the whole workflow. You just tweak things, and lucky for us, you actually see them on the screen live. Okay, I think I know what's missing here. I think this all setting is a little bit too spastic. We've spoken about time stretch. Let's use time stretch. Let's slow things down. Let's mellow things down a little bit. So time stretch to particles. Let's drop the time a little bit. Let's restart the playhead. Look at that. This is much better now. This is much, much more interesting now. So in the primitive emitter, we have 6 seconds of life. What if we had it shorter then? Yeah, 2 seconds actually works. So this is the sweet spot. Cool. Let's do a couple more things. I think it would be nice to have a camera here. As I'm connecting camera to the root of the scene, I see that it came into the center of the graph. Just gonna pivot it backwards a little bit. Or actually, I'm going to use this property called camera option set to current view. So I'm just going to find a position that I like. Perhaps this, and I'm going to click on camera options set to current view. And if I hit 0 now, I'm looking through this camera to the particles I've just built. Okay, cool. Oh, they are a bit thick now. Why don't we set this to 4 instead? There we go. I would like this camera to turn around and around this setting. So just like in a modifier chapter we build a gimbal, I think we will do that same thing here. So let's grab a null. Let's reconnect camera through the null. And now we can turn around this setting with a continuous modifier. So I'm going to grab continuous modifier and I'm going to connect it to the rotation heading property. It's rather slow. Let's bump up the numbers. 20. Great. Let's do some housekeeping. Let's put all the lighting nodes here on the side. And let's leave some space for camera here in the bottom. What else can we do? Let's grab a light scattering beam. We haven't tried this node yet. It's a very nice little node that helps us to build a little bit more dynamic background, because in this case now it's just black. I don't necessarily like it just black. So it comes in as a sphere of light. I'm just going to decrease the brightness a bit, but it doesn't respect the actual geometry in the scene. So we can enable the depth test. And as we do that, it will start to respect the geometry that is in front of it. Or actually, let's just keep it in the center. Well, let's make it blue and a little bit darker. There we go. I think this right here starts to look like something. Now, as previously discussed, we can use several renderers, so why don't we bring back the same geometry connection renderer. I do like the lines. I don't necessarily like the triangles. Obviously, you can keep it if that's your choice. My preference is to tick off the draw triangles and bring back the lines. There we go. Those lines are a bit thick. I'm going to reduce the alpha and it's not going to be that thick anymore. I want these trails to have some kind of a color. In this case, instead of using a live color shader, I think I'm going to go for color ramp. And I'm just going to connect this color ramp to the primitive emitter's color control node. So now these two nodes can work together and control the color. So maybe one should be, say, orange, and the other one could be, well, maybe magenta. There we go. In a primitive emitter, we have a whole bracket for the color control. So we could choose it. We could choose to go for input control, for input color, or emission time. I think I'm gonna go for emission time. How would it look with a random color? Yeah, let's keep it a random color. So now if I come back to the geometry connection render, I can tick on use vertex colors. And since we colored the emitter, we actually can tick that on and it will work. Now we're using vertex colors. Maybe we should add a point renderer to this setting. Connecting it to the root. It came in as a little quad right there. I see it already. Let's make the particles a little bit bigger. Now, it is drawing these quads on every single available particle, on all 8,000. I don't necessarily want that. I think I'm gonna go for the setting called use particle. There it is, particle use amount. Let's drop that down quite a lot, maybe 0.1. So it's only on, well, probably 1,000 or so. I think we could make do with even less. There we go. Let's make these quads into circles. So let's grab gradient. We already know what to do with the gradient, so we're just gonna pipe it into the first input. We're gonna make it radial, and we're gonna increase the inner range. Okay, there we go. Could those particles be bigger still? Absolutely. Could they be in size random? Yes, sure. Should it exceed 1? Absolutely not. As we discussed, that would just kill off the smallest particles on the screen and we would be taxed with the things that we don't render. Should we change blend mode? No, I guess linear is fine, but we should add some motion blur. Maybe more motion blur. It's a little bit hard to read motion blur when everything is so slow. So maybe 5. Yeah, there we go. This is a little bit more interesting. So these geometry connection trails, could they be a little bit thicker then? I don't think that lines alpha setting is actually making a big change for me now. I think I'm gonna tick on thick lines. And now I have a setting that I can use, so thick line width. So let's just make it a little bit thicker. Not too much, just a little bit. So why don't we bring this asset that we used before, the 0.6 ring, and why don't we just attach it to the camera so we encapsulate this setting so it looks a little bit more wrapped or bounded. We will need a image plane. Now we have to send that image plane a little bit backwards or forwards on a z-axis because now it's literally living exactly where the camera is. So let's just pull it back. Now we see it on the screen. Let's feed this video loader to it. It could be probably closer to us actually. There we go. Maybe a bit bigger. And it's very intrusive, so maybe the alpha could be a little bit reduced. Could we change the color? We could, but do we have to? Absolutely not. I think this works as is. Okay, cool. So how about some post effects? Mandatory glow. Oh, it's a bit harsh. So let's increase the threshold, maybe reduce the softness. Let's take out the blur scale. Intensity? Nah, we don't want much of it. Let's just keep it to a modest 0.2 setting. Yeah, it added a little bit extra touch, just a little bit extra glow. That's exactly what we were aiming for. Cool. Colors, could those be nicer? Could those be something more exciting? If it was yellow and red, would that be nicer? Would that work? Actually, if there were 3 of them, maybe that could be a little bit more fun. I know, it's our environment map, but it gives a very specific shade of blue. So if now I come back to my available assets, HDRIs, and I just bring them all in, because why not? I'm gonna cycle through and choose some other one that hopefully will fit this better. Yeah, I think this looks nicer. And in fact, I can even bring some colorlets, because I do have some of them available in assets. Well, I can grab any from the available list, connect it to, say, camera, and just cycle through and find the one that works best for me here. I think I'm gonna stick with Brandon. Maybe it shouldn't be so powerful, maybe just 0.5 on that setting. But yeah, we're getting there. Okay, I think you're getting the gist of what I'm doing here. I'm fairly sophisticated to leave you guys to it, and I'm sure you're gonna build something really cool, really fun looking once you're done with this workshop. In the meantime, I'm gonna prepare for the next one, so see you there when you're ready.